morning. This is D.A. Ward. In Riverside County, California, the 13th, Tuesday, the 13th of April, 2021, I think. I just checked my phone to get the date, which I always have to do. And so I marked the date and I plugged in the camera, and just as I plugged in the camera, I'm cruising at about 68 miles an hour on a 60 mile per hour speed limit road, and I see a motorcycle officer on the opposite side of the street. So I'm dealing with like too many inputs at one time, and I lost the date. I think it's April 13th. Anyway, this is still a long series of reminiscences having to do with William Rathbun, the late William Rathbun, one of my best friends in the world. Although he had literally dozens of best friends, and I had just a few. He and his brother. I could title this particular reminisce by some sort of a theme. It's Bill and the Indians. Let's talk about that. Bill and the Native Americans. It's a complex subject. It's really complex, actually. Bill was a gamer in life. I mean, he, had that curiosity that really skilled mathematicians have. The ability to learn things fast and to take great joy in learning them. And it showed up in all different facets of his life. He had a weekly bridge game, the card game, at his house usually, although it at one point was moving from house to house in Berkeley, depending on who was who were the four card players at that particular time and space. I remember sitting in on one of those bridge sessions, and I wasn't very good at bridge, and it was obvious, and so I was out of my league. Everybody was very sympathetic, though. If I remember correctly, maybe all the insinuations were just going right over my head. He had literally a generation of people attended these card games. The older members either dying or going insane. One guy just disappeared in morass of depression, I guess you'd say, and wasn't heard from again. Another guy died, one of the clean-cut, wonderful, wonderfully accomplished guys from the University of Colorado that came early at Bill's insistence, probably. I've forgotten his name. Anyway, he was the person I would least have expected to die, and he died suddenly. This is when I was in my 40s, probably. So the guy must have been in his 40s. And that went way beyond bridge. It had to do with anything that was complicated, or seemed complicated at first. Many things seemed complicated at first and then turn out to be ridiculously simple. This is one of those. Space Invaders. Early 8-bit video game, or computer game, which we played in his living room, trying to rack up points. I spent years of my life mastering 8-bit video games, which were all skill-oriented in those days. They had none of this play acting and role-playing stuff that goes on now. So they were actually tests of your skill with hand-eye coordination more than anything else, and the ability to recognize patterns at a great distance. Recognize something that, although random, repeated itself, and so therefore you could statistically expect certain things to happen, which aided your score, aided you in getting higher scores. Space Invaders was these points of light that got larger and larger and became planets or asteroids. Maybe it was called asteroids. I'm trying to think. Maybe I'm getting mixed up with another 8-bit game. But anyway, it came at you, and you're in a spaceship, supposedly. The viewer is sitting there in the front of a spaceship, zooming through space, and these things are coming at you, and you have to avoid them. Some of them, I think some of them were programmed to veer at you, and I'm not sure. I might be mixing that up with another game that I played mainly in LA on an 8-bit playing Macintosh computer, early Apple computer. That might have been called asteroids. I'm not sure, actually. But what that was things coming at you, not bodies, not spherical things getting larger and larger as they approached you, but even more basic, a pattern of things clustering around you, coming at you from 4 angles: the bottom, the top screen, left screen, right screen, and in the midst of this you had to avoid them all. And so it was an exercise in peripheral vision, mainly, sensing something that was dangerous, and reacting to it before your mind could actually fasten on what it was. Really high-end skill. I would think that particular game, God, what was it called? It wasn't very popular either. That particular game would be the best, one of the best ways to train pilots because of its, I mean, pilots, fighter pilots, I'm thinking, which is another really old style before planes were turned into robots and people were just there to make sure that that it didn't go digitally insane by some sort of glitch or another. Anyway, it would have been great for World War II fighter pilots where peripheral vision was and instant reaction were the difference between life and death. We're going wide afield, of course, as usual, but I'm trying to give you an idea of why it's so complex. The Indian part of our preoccupation at the time. A preoccupation that still exists. I mean, even though I can't, even though the Indian ceremonies that we used to attend have now dried up as a generation of hand game players gets older and older, Indian and white. Marvin's in his 90s, and Bill just died, and Bob Beckwith's approaching 90. I'm approaching 72. I was the youngest, actually. Bob Rathbun, Bill's brother, long dead, along with his wife. And Bill's brother's daughter, the elfin Heather Rathbun, become a totally different human being, really efficient, really unflappable resident of Alaska with unfortunate side effects of living in a state in which the winter is essentially you and in a cold house eating food to pass the time. So she's got large and somewhat belligerent, but when you hear her voice you realize that's Heather. It's Heather Rathbun, the wide-eyed teenager, wide-eyed 7-year-old that I knew. She has a friend, Emily, who is a girlhood friend from Bolinas. During the big Zoom call flurry, when Bill was out of the hospital for the second time and it was obvious that he was dying, they'd prop him up and he'd join these Zoom calls, and which Heather managed from her account as a remote teacher of students in Alaska and a consultant for the Alaska school system on using remote teaching to get to at-risk kinds of kids out of the vast, icy Native American steppes. So here's the paradox. We decided that we were going to be cool with the Indians, and the Indians and the hippies were like brothers, and the Indians were doing what we wanted to do, which was living tribally and being doing romantic things out in really pristine, beautiful natural areas. Of the few remainders of living in roundhouses all winter, i.e. like Heather Rathbun, but in a huge cedar bark dwelling half buried in the earth and with a single campfire in the center and a whole set of clans living in this one single room dwelling. Slices of territory, like slices of a pie, I guess, all around the spokes around the fire, telling stories all winter. That was what we were after. We were after that knowledge, and so we started. Bob Rathbun spent a couple really fruitful years in the mountains of the Feather River drainage in California, talking to the oldest Indians, the ones who were living in shacks in these deep canyons on the several forks of the Feather River. And these old people turned out to be the last repositories of the Maidu culture, totally untouched, well, not totally untouched, but I mean, conversant with the power of, with the organization and habits of the white residents, the invaders, the invading race, but really far enough from the fertile and productive and what is that phrase that they use now, computer, in the modern age? Slight sense of disgust. It's monetizable or something. These old Indians were territory and pieces of land that were not monetizable. And so they maintained their language and did what they always did, what was passed down to them in a kind of an adulterated form. One of the things passed down to them was how to drink alcohol. That wasn't very good. That was a European invention that turns out to be the Indian culture was really seeking power and the non-worldly ecstatic feeling of living in a world full of magical things, animals that came to life and talked. And moments of blind revelation, more suited to things like peyote and psychedelics than alcohol, but alcohol is what they got in excess. And, European culture raises its members, both male and female, to drink. And they'd already weeded out by natural selection, already weeded out the breeding stock that could not handle alcohol and therefore became drunkards, although many people became drunkards anyway. It was totally weeded out. But, I'm wondering if alcohol actually isn't a kind of a filter for reproduction, and a filter that rewards people who can partake of alcohol and still be effective breadwinners and mothers and caregivers. Kind of selected for certain characteristics of intelligence and also blind, stubborn fidelity to religion. So that those who weren't so intelligent got to reproduce. Because, you prayed 3 times a day, and every time you got drunk, you did some sort of ceremony of repentance and went back to a normal life. Overly drunk and sinned. They called it sin. It was really giving in to your base instincts. Participating in Saturnalias and things that the Romans used to also institutionalize in their culture. The peasants in Europe festivals and dances with church sponsorship, actually, many of them, and trading market days in which you went into a larger place and traded your cow for somebody else's goat, or staves of wheat or something, staves, bags of grain, I guess you'd say. So, Bill Rathbun, because he was a person who enjoyed the game aspect of things, got really into the hand game, the Indians gambling game, which is a fairly, I think, late introduction to Indian culture. But I'm not sure. I mean, it could be prehistoric for all I know. The Indian tribes is another inadequate term that's come down to us. The Indian clans, I guess would be better, that lived in these little canyons that these old guys were still, where the old guys still had their shacks that Bob Rathbun interviewed. Got shaman lore and stories of gatherings, all sorts of stuff having to do with the sacred places and their stories behind those places. Anyway, all these canyons, these river canyons on the west slope of the Sierra Nevadas, were inhabited by people who were loosely related and spoke the same or a very similar dialect, and yet they were all constantly at war with each other, and in small ways at war, over the meadows mainly, where the greatest amount of food value was harvested by the women, digging roots in the swampy meadowlands of the upper meadows of the Sierra Nevadas, where the real food lay, and also down the desert side and down the more rainy side of the mountains, where the oaks grew. Another huge piece of their diet was acorn meal, which had to be prepared very specially because it would kill you if you just grind up an acorn and make it into a loaf of bread. It's full of tannin, other nasty things. But they had a technology for leaching out the tannin using running water. Putting baskets of that's one of the reasons they had such tight baskets. I think they put tight baskets full of acorn meal in the running water of the streams. The streams leached away the tannin. And then they put the goopy stuff into a kettle and heated it and had acorn soup. I don't think they actually made a bread out of it, but it was highly nutritious. I've had one of the things we did at the ceremonial, the Indian ceremonies that we attached ourselves to and helped organize, actually. So it wasn't just a one-way street, but was acorn soup. almost every time there would be acorn soup, and either there was a lot of it or a very little bit of it, and it was a special treat. Some of the old Indian women were making it still. So they had this limited warfare going on, and they were warring with each other, especially the tribes that were coming up from the desert side of the Sierras and infiltrating the higher elevations with the tribes that were living on the eastern side of the Sierras, and that especially interacting with the tribes coming up the mountains from the western sides. And they were entirely different language groups, actually. The Maidu were the western side, and high elevation eastern side dwellers, and down almost at the desert floor were the Paiute. Coming down from the north were the Pit River. A really warlike culture originally. And there were other Indian groups that would occasionally show up at these ceremonies. Modoc. I've got to slow down. When this road gets slick, it's a killer. It almost killed me one time. This is the area that I almost hated. See this curve right here? Oh, if your car lets go there, you end up at the cliff face, crashing into the cliff face. If you're lucky, the limited bit of steering that you can do in a split second will cause you to brush the cliff face. What I did, and I ended up with the airbags out. At that point, I had a car that had airbags. That was a lucky thing for me. Anyway, one of the first airbag models, a 98 Honda Civic, no, 98 Mazda 626. Now I'm driving a 91 Mazda without airbags. So I have to slow down at that curve. Same thing, stick shift. Wonderful car, but primitive in some ways. More stable in other ways. Less liable to have electronics total your car, for one thing. So Bill really got into the hand game, and it was the primary thing we did when we went to the bear dance in the spring. And later, the Feather River Maidu had a roundhouse and a celebration on the on the west side. The bear dance was a continuation of the truce between the two radically different tribes, the Paiute kinds of Indians coming up from the desert, to trade with the high canyon dwelling Indians, who were actually nomadic and went down out of those canyons when it got snowy and intensely cold, where they camped in roundhouses. But further down, they didn't stay at 10,000 feet. On the west side of the Sierras, they went down into the snow-covered meadows, high meadows, but not really high meadows, or into on the edge of the canyons, like the Feather River Maidu that had this ceremony that we would attend in a roundhouse. Was built by the Maidu in collaboration, I think. Well, the roundhouse at Gladys Mankins ranch was built as a project by the University of the Sacramento State people, I think, anthropology department, in cooperation with the tribes. And a lot of people showed up and built a roundhouse. And the same thing, I think, happened at Feather River, but I think it was mostly it was just the Maidu themselves that were living there, because they built it on a private ranch belonging to an Indian member of the tribe. And that became a kind of like these things always do, it became a point of contention. Both the Bear Dance and the Feather River group had internal dissensions having to do with who owned the property and who was responsible for the ceremony, and it was power struggles like everybody has. So Bill learned the hand game as a effortless exercise. Either that or he spent a lot of time. I mean, he was up in this area, and he was able to go to lots and lots of different Indian ceremonies that I never attended. I was coming up from LA and points, Florida and all sorts of places where I was traveling, itinerantly traveling and hitchhiking and driving junky vehicles around after apple harvest and orange harvest and whatever I was doing at the time. So I didn't have time to really, and I didn't have a cassette player like Bill had, a real a cassette recorder, a real amazing invention, for which he carried in a basket he got with Sarah in the Philippines. But it looked just like a Maidu basket. It was an indigenous tribe in the Philippines that was making things out of reeds for obvious survival reasons. And he had this thing, and it had a couple of loops you could carry like a handbag, unlike a Maidu basket. And he parked it at everybody, right dead front when we were playing hand game, and it contained an early tape recorder, cassette recorder, before they were really common. very expensive at the time. So he recorded the songs. He recorded all the songs and took them home and listened to them and learned them. And of all the people that showed up every year, there was a group of us, probably, a loose assemblage of hippies and ex-hippies and friends of Bill's and friends of other hippie kinds of people like myself. I brought several girlfriends up there for one reason or another. For the one obvious reason, that is to show them how adventurous I could be. And Bill was the leader of the gang because he was the one that knew all the songs, and I could remember the songs once we started them. Once we started singing. A few stuck with me. So penny, so penny, kanana, kanana. So penny, kanana, kanana. So penny, Imagine singing these things in a loop for an hour while you're trying to play a gambling game, and the strength of the song is the way in which you win the game by creating an aura of confusion on the other side. When it comes time for them to guess the markers that you're hiding in next to your body, in your fists, that's the hand game. That's why they call it the hand game. They're in your hands, these markers, and if the other side guesses them, it's their turn to sing and gain sticks. Sometimes it's called the stick game. And whoever gets, each side starts out with like 12 sticks or 8 sticks. And if one side, and every time you're guessed, a single stick goes across to the other team. Every time one of the people on your side is hiding a pair of bones. They call it the bone game, another name for it. Ideally, cougar four-limb bones. One of them with a black stripe, and the other just polished bone. So people opposite you are trying to guess where the bones are as they see them across the fire, across the way, and if they guess the right pattern, you lose those bones. The person who was hiding them got guessed correctly. The guessing was done by a gesture, you know. There were 4 different gestures for the 4 different combinations. Complicated stuff for anybody starting out, but pretty obvious after you've played it for years and years and years. And so we were, and we would go to these ceremonies, and even though we weren't Indians, we were accepted. In the early years, it was touch and go. Bob Rathbun was threatened with, I mean, these old Indians that were living in these cabins in the Sierras, some of them were really used to tribal warfare and belligerence as a form of power, and they'd go to these hand games with their families, younger kids who are all heavy drinkers now, because of the culture change, and everybody get wildly drunk and sometimes violent, and you had to watch yourself. So Bob was threatened, and his son John, who was traveling around like I was, probably as pure a hippie as you'll ever find in the world, still a hippie, still a pure hippie in his 50s now, living on the edge of the Hawaiian islands, surfing, and living that incredibly slow marijuana dream of a lifestyle, marijuana-induced dream of a lifestyle. And I'm living in a much faster-paced world in which I have responsibility for a child, raising a child, and a wife, and keeping a household, and so I don't even smoke marijuana anymore. But a new generation, we put it over that it was ceremonial, and it really, really did catch. And the United States has got it now. Almost anybody can get it for free without being put in jail for 20 years. And as a ceremonial drug, it's non perio or something. I don't know how to pronounce that French word. And so for Bill, not only did he learn the game and lead the game, but he in cooperation with myself and the people who always showed up, created a camping extravaganza, a huge temporary settlement on the banks of the river, the banks of the stream that go through the ceremonial grounds in Susanville, and before that in Janesville Ranch, that Gladys Mankins, who is half Maidu and half Paiute, maintained as a safe meeting area by Indian tradition between the two trading tribes. Continuation of that. She hosted it, this little old woman, for years and years and years and years and years and years, 20 years maybe, that I was there. 15 or 18 years or something, anyway. And then she died, and the ranch became part of the property, switched and went to her heirs, and the thing fell apart. It didn't fall apart, it became a huge trophy for another group of Maidu Concow Maidu, I believe, who are living in Susanville, and they took it over and maintained it. They actually got the tribal leader that we dealt with had an American education, and we all pitched in, but mainly Bill Rathbun because of his centrality to the thing, and got government to give the Maidu some land as a ceremonial area that was national forest land. Not give it to them, but dedicate it to their hand game, to their spring ceremony, bear dance ceremony. And the second big encampment after the one at Gladys's was at this totally pristine place back in the mountains that the Forest Service dedicated to the ceremony. And I think it's still going on. It's been, the real problem is the climate change has changed the ecosystem, the forest fire ecosystem of the Sierras, and the western slope Feather River Maidu were totally burned out of their roundhouse. Roundhouse was burned. The entire ridge was burned up just 2 years ago. And we went back for one last hand game, but it was already falling apart. There were some squabbles going on, interior and political squabbles, and one of the main organizers is no longer there because he he put a house trailer on a piece of property that he assumed was common Indian property because it had been that piece of property had been lived on by an older Indian who was another one of those old men in a cabin. And when he died, Kirby put a house trailer there and was planning on settling in, but it turned out that that was part of the land that was owned by another family of Maidu who were running the ceremony, and because Kirby had co-hosted and organized and did all half of the grunt work for years and years and years. It was assumed it was okay. He assumed it was okay, and the other half, not the guy that actually ran the hand game with him, but his brother, who had a more lawyerly background, kicked Kirby off the land, threatened to push his house trailer down into the canyon, off this cliff. Dramatic stuff. All right. So you can see a little of the complexity I was hinting at when I said at the beginning, this is a very complex subject. A group of hippies essentially lived off of the Indian tribes, ate their food, came in, participated in their ceremonies, helped them, but not to the point of organizing everything, not to the point of building and maintaining and providing food in many cases. And so we were, in a sense, freeloading on their culture, which is what I wanted to say from the beginning, because we were dilettantes. We were young, stoned, college-educated white people with a new idea of ourselves, trying to find ourselves, trying to come up with an alternate culture to the one that was had just completed 2 massive world wars and was trying to start a third. At least we understood that. Trying to stop war, trying to stop aggression and industrialization and all those evils we perceived. But that's another thing to talk about in another taping. So this is DA War, the 13th of April, 2021. Signing off.